Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel and to the third episode of the Living Creative podcast, where I interview various industry professionals who I've worked with over the years, and I've always wanted to quiz about their approach to the industry and living creatively. On today's episode, I've invited musician, colleague and friend Edd Blakeley. For those not familiar with Edd's work, he is a musician who's been writing music and creating music for various projects over the years. He's worked for companies like SEGA, he's made work for film, TV, he's worn a lot of hats over the years. So thank you for coming all the way down to the studio and being here in person.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So when I had Joe on the podcast for the first episode, one of the things we mentioned, it was only brief, was college. And he talked about working on iMacs for the first time. And it was you he brought up because you were the first person to actually show us how to edit on a computer.
He was great because he showed us how to use it. We're both professional editors now, and that might not have happened without him showing us.
It's true. And that stuck in my head. And then before I knew it, I was calling you and saying, listen, man, do you want to come on the podcast and we can just talk about stuff, because all of these stories cross paths. I guess my first question would be, do you remember those times from back in the day? And what made you pursue music as a career as opposed to editing, production, which is what you were doing back in 2004 or 5 college?
Yeah, the honest truth of it was I was more than anything, I was just a computer nerd, I think. So doing stuff like working on the Apple editing software, all that stuff comes quite naturally to me. So I think it wasn't necessarily the editing that was attractive so much as just being able to use that computer. And I sort of took it for granted. I never thought we had good kit at that school. I never really rated it. I suppose looking back, the stories you guys told me about the gear you had from where you came.
The stories about no gear.
Yeah. And we had some good teachers, I think, didn't we? And stuff like that. Yeah. And I do. My memory's not great about the details.
Did we have?
Well, we had at least some interested people. The teaching quality was definitely a bit. But that's just half of the course, isn't it?
iMacs were pretty normal then. Like Joe said, it sounds like we're 50, 60 years old. Like, why are we so fascinated with iMacs? But we just didn't have them. So editing in camera was really the only thing we could do. Like he said, fast forwarding, rewinding. If the take's gone wrong, rewind it, record over it. But it was when you said, oh, fuck it, we can just keep recording. We might use a little bit of that take and a little bit of this take, and we'll just stitch them all together. And I was like, holy fuck.
What kind of wizardry is this? Yeah.
This is what cost us so much time, was getting it so perfect. And it was because of that and having those computers that made us win the award for the best short film of that year, Brass, which you directed.
I remember that. That was good fun.
You actually were directing and you knew what that was and you knew how to edit. So that's why I ask, what made you pursue music as opposed? Was that something you always wanted to do, but
it's interesting hearing you say you thought I was a good director and knew what that was. I don't actually, at the time, I definitely didn't know what I was doing. I might have called myself that probably. With regards to the music, it's always been a part of my life. My dad is a really accomplished musician. He's a fiddle player mainly, but he plays all kinds of instruments. He's really, across the board, good quality musician.
I wish myself was dead, better far instead on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt there and turn her down a rocky road and all the way to Dublin.
And I grew up with it being a fabric of my existence. It's always been there. One of my earliest memories is just coming in and watching him play piano, and I was just asking questions, like, what are you doing there? How are you doing that? And I subsequently asked my dad about this, and I think he said, you'd come in and you'd watch for about 30 seconds and go, that's cool, and then walk out again. So it kind of been that interesting. But
just taking in little bits
at a time.
Absorbing, yeah.
Basically, it was there all the time in one way or another. My dad was always playing music. I mean, I kind of wanted everything, as you do when you're young. I wanted to be able to do everything, and I did, I suppose, for a while. Because we were doing brass in, what were we, 16, 17 or something?
Yeah. What was ironic, though, was I wanted to be a musician then. And so I actually took music tech as an A-level. You weren't in our class,
No.
right? But you kept coming into the
Yes,
class.
I kept wandering in
So
for
I'd be
fun.
like, who is this guy? He's not even, and they'll be like, Ed, he's all right. He loves music. And you were better than everyone in the class.
Was I?
More or less, yeah. There's a couple of people who were quite good on sax, but otherwise, you always figured out like how to do what the teacher wanted much quicker than anyone else. And we were actually taking the class.
I don't remember that.
But it was funny though that it switched like that.
Yeah, we
And-
switched places.
yeah.
I see what you're saying. I think I did take the music tech, but I didn't take any lessons. So I did come in and annoy you lot and distract you lot from. I remember that now. Actually, it was good fun. But I couldn't read music either. So music tech was the obvious one in that sense because I don't think it was prerequisite.
It didn't require you to read music.
Yeah, but it was a
But
hindrance.
there was
you're right.
there was something about when a teacher asked you to do something that is to an extent expected. It's quite a hurdle when you don't know how to do the thing the teacher's asking you. It might just be because you've not had a one-on-one with the teacher for them to tell you whatever it is. To get over that hurdle takes, like, I would say some bravery, really, because you need to be able to say, I don't know how to do this. Looking back, it's like, why didn't I just ask for the help? But I think a lot of the time it was easier to just hide from it.
Yeah. I do remember my mum sitting me down and being, I said that I don't really know what I want to do, and she said, because I was trying to over-rationalize it and overthink it, which is it's a theme of my life, actually, overthinking, to be honest. And she just said, look, what would you prefer to do? If getting up day to day, what drives you more? And it didn't take me long to answer music.
We did brass, and following that, maybe a year or two later, I went to uni. And I started realizing how hard it was to work in groups with students. And actually, by sort of the end of the first year, I started kind of putting the real work aside and started focusing on my own project, which was the making of. Which became literally a story about how hard it was to work in a group, because often the behind the scenes of a project becomes more interesting than the production itself. When I started putting together the making of, I was like, Ed, I want to do a satire about filmmaking and how horrible it is. And you were like, can I act in it?
Was I?
I think I said, would you be willing to play yourself? And so there was like moments in the film where we were just acting as ourselves, but like these satire versions of ourselves. And that's kind of what the whole film was about. Everyone was playing a character of themselves.
Yeah.
In the film, I'm supposed to be reviewing a track at your house.
Oh, yeah.
Of
like
film.
a spot session.
And I've never met you before.
Yeah.
And I just roll up to your house and I knock on the door and I'm like, are you Ed? And you're like, yeah. And we rehearsed this whole thing.
Did we? Yeah.
Yeah.
This vaguely rings bells, actually.
Yeah.
We've
And,
got to bring this up and have a look.
Ed, do you compose music? Are you Edward?
Yes.
Yeah. Adam.
Editor.
Yeah, that's the one. Just that thing of like, I've gate crashed your studio. You're trying to give an interview, and literally in the background, I'm hitting the chords at every moment when you try and say something to the camera.
Adam liked it. I'm going to be working on the second and third tracks now.
The reason that satire works is because you've met people who literally do that in life.
You didn't want to direct it?
Well, no, I guess
You didn't want the responsibility?
No, I mean, the editor has a lot of responsibility. I mean, the editor, he edits the whole film, so he's got a lot of work to do as well, so,
Yeah, but it's all in post-production, isn't it?
But what was so good about that was you would be able to create music for these, like, ploddy, plucky scenes, completely different to the other stuff that you had made, because you'd be like, no, you know what this scene needs? It needs a slower pace, or it needs a little bit of like silliness to it. You need to know what you're expecting, and so you would create a piece of music which would just be like boom, 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 and it would just be so perfect. And that was kind of my introduction to like comedy filmmaking.
Look, do you want to direct this or what? Because to be honest, I don't have a fucking problem with it. Alright? This is fucking ridiculous.
You having a giggle? I didn't actually mean
You just said. Well, you just said that.
I don't give a crap. What are you doing? I am the director.
The good times, man. I mean, it's funny that you say that the way you prefer to work is to have the music before the video. I mean, I suppose in a sense we're exactly the same. I like to have the video locked before I do the music, because you can really get under the skin and you know that it's locked. And your job is simply and 100% to amplify or modulate that feeling at that time in the film.
In the case of Evidence of Existence, which was the feature film I passed to you to compose music for, with that, we worked back and forth for an entire year on part of the soundtrack for one of the chapters in the film. And the reason that was one of the most beautiful pieces of music in any of the films I've made was due to the fact that we spent so much time talking about the characters and having that collaboration until eventually we got to a piece of music that was...
It's something that neither of you were expecting.
Yeah.
It's still good.
Yeah.
Because there's a hell of a lot of ways to do something badly.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of new ideas that can be very bad. So when you do occasionally come across a good one, and it is because of that symbiotic input, that's actually, I think that's quite a rare thing. It makes you squirm listening to old stuff, you know, or watching it. I imagine sometimes, it'll probably make us both squirm in some ways, just from the production values. I guess. But no, I remember the process being good, and I want to keep doing that.
The creative process.
Yeah, and it's funny, and that we had the luxury of time on that. That's the bottom line as well. Not only did we work well together and communicate well, really important as well, but we had quite a lot of time to do it.
I find it interesting how our priorities, or maybe the idea of what the industry was going to be like, has changed. In the last sort of 9-10 years, we worked for Marvel, Disney, SEGA, you know, some of these names that back in the day would have been an absolute dream. But it's funny how, like, we've kind of almost done a 180 in that sense. We don't care as much about working for the big brands as much as the smaller, more personal and more intimate work. Whether it be our personal work or whether it be someone we know.
For me, it was sort of, you know, this classic stuff of our generation. It was like Hans Zimmer, you know, if I could write something like Hans Zimmer, you know. And now, I mean, I still have a soft spot for Hans, of course. But like now I'm like, I don't want to do anything like that. You know, it's like, it all goes 180 for sure.
Until someone calls you and says, can you write
Can you do a Hans Zimmer copy?
Like, oh, fuck. Like, but what is it about that? Is it just because you realise that you think that's where the magic is, and then when you actually finally do a job for a big brand like that, you realise that actually there's very little creativity in it?
For me, it's like a new challenge, you know. You're like in your 20s is kind of like you've got a lot of movement about yourself. You want to move on to the next big thing, you know, all the time. I've got the next big thing on my sights. I'm I'm really focused on that.
Yeah.
And then like now I'm in the 30s. I don't know about you. I feel more like comfortable without needing one of those necessarily, you know.
Maybe there's an element of not having to prove yourself as
much.
Exactly.
Like 20s is like proving yourself,
and it's a lot of it's proving it to yourself. Can I work for a company like that?
Am I actually good enough to do that? Like you have two options. Like you can either consider that like I'm done, you know, I'm success, hooray, and rest on your laurels. Yeah. The only other option is to like to move on to the next thing. What haven't I done? You know, like what's the next challenge? I guess because my boredom threshold's really low. It doesn't have to be completely different. It just needs to have some new little avenue, whether it's new people or a new format. I've just taken a VR game job for later in the year with the company I know quite well. I've worked with them before and stuff like that. But so I know the people, but I've never done a VR music soundtrack. When they came up with that one, I was like, because immediately I have no idea what I'm doing. Like VR, how do you go about that? You know, so I've got work ahead of me now. Like music is one of those pursuits that you just get better the more you do it. So if I focus down on one thing, I'd probably get quite good at it. But because my boredom threshold is really low, I'll just I'll move on to the next thing. Yeah.
It's actually fun. Have you ever read the book Flow?
No, I think you mentioned that one to me before, possibly.
In order to find that perfect balance, it's like you don't want the challenge to be too high, because if the challenge is too high, that's when it's like you want to do it, but you don't really have the tools and the know-how to
you crumble.
And that might go on a bit too long, and then you crumble, or you're just disappointed in yourself, and it puts you off ever doing it again.
I see. Yeah.
Likewise, you don't want that challenge to be too low, where you've done it so many times that it just becomes a bit apathetic. And you're like, but when someone offers you a piece of work that you've never done before, the challenge is higher than where you currently are with those skills.
Just slightly outside of the safe space. Yeah,
exactly. Just above but you know you can reach it because it's not so far out of your skill set, but it excites you at the idea of being able to do that thing that you can't currently do. But in order to get there, you need to level up. And that would be something like that VR thing that you just mentioned.
But see, I was going to say, like, to counter that, there's a couple of times I've definitely overreached.
You thought you could just do something.
Yeah. I think it's like essentially it's a sort of overconfidence, you know, and confidence is quite essential in music. I think you have to have at least some, otherwise you're not even going to start, you know. But there's been a couple of times just where the genre I've underestimated how much nuance there is in the type of music and how much is required to get it to a good standard. There are certain things you just cannot do without a certain degree of knowledge. So like orchestra, you cannot do anything with an orchestra without having tried doing things with it and learning what works and what doesn't. And a knowledge of all the instruments really helps, and a knowledge of what like they can achieve and the sounds they can create and the limitations they have. But back then it was like, I hear the sound in my head and it sounds like an orchestra, and I just go on my computer, load up these sounds, and then you do this and blah, blah, blah. And what you sort of find when that happens is that it doesn't work, you know. And the reason it doesn't work is because you don't know what each one is supposed to do to achieve that role.
It's that classic thing of you need to learn what the rules are before
in order to break them.
Yeah.
It's learning to say when someone comes in with something that's beyond your skill, you know, learning where that is and just going, actually, that's probably, I couldn't do that very well.
If that challenge is really fucking high, it's not that you can't do it, it's that it requires so much more time to reach it. But you don't always know that, right? So you need to learn to identify that, like you were just saying.
That's like a learning process in itself, I think.
Just knowing.
Yeah.
Like, just knowing.
Whether I can actually do something on, you know, or not.
I love speaking to creative people because I love to get their approach as to how they navigate their lifestyle because of the nature of the work. In fact, even to this day, when I speak to my mum about the stuff I do, she doesn't really understand how I get paid for what I do, or how it works. Like, is it every week? Is it every month? How do you not? When's the next piece of work coming?
What are they paying you for?
How do you live?
What is it exactly you do?
Yeah, one of these days you need to grow up and get a proper job. I don't even blame that train of thought, because even though it can sometimes seem undermining, it's not. It comes from a place of, I don't understand how you can live a life that's so sporadic. So I guess my question is, how do you navigate this creative lifestyle and balance everything out? Being a musician, composer, having a house, you know.
And all the day-to-day rigmarole.
You know, going through all that.
With great difficulty.
It's exactly what Joe said.
Really?
Yeah.
I think sometimes it looks easy, actually. And actually sometimes it is easy. I think, like, sometimes the creative lifestyle is probably the best thing, and sometimes I think it's the worst thing, you know.
Could you give examples of
so through your 20s, like money management, I mean, it sounds simple, but like the first time you get a gig that's, you know, I don't know, 4 digits, you know, thousands of pounds, whatever, £1,000, it's like an absolute, you're buying bottles of champagne going, wait, you know, like, this is, I've made it, you know, I never need to earn it ever again, like, you know. And then hang on a second, it's £1,000. It's like, it's gone in absolutely no time. But so that's like it's overspending and stuff like that. It's a classic problem, you know, the taxman catching up with you. These are all like problems that you learn, I think, as you go.
Which would have all been resolved had you had a little bit of help in school about how self-employment works.
Learning about money management, and we didn't get any of that, did we? I mean, I didn't.
It only takes literally a week to not even a week, a day, to be given a sort of quick breakdown of how it works, what you can get expenses on, what, you know. But you would think that by the time you get to somewhere like uni, you know, where there are self-employed,
I suppose so,
teachers there who are getting hired to fill in, substitute, whatever.
None of them mention the...
No one just stops to think, you know, and it's the same that no one stops to think, like, you know, there's a competition you guys should know about. If you guys get your film into the BFI, you know, in the 16 to 25-year-old contest, you're going to win it, and you'll get like a prize of, like, you know, you just need these people to sort of point you in the right direction.
A bit more like practical knowledge, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's like, instead they just let you do whatever, and like you said, you find yourself in trouble with the tax man, or you find yourself just with no money, even though you've done 3 jobs which should technically have put you in the green.
That's like That was the one that I think you're right. We could have done the most help with. The only options you've got are learn it as you go, or don't.
I've spoken to so many other creatives who aren't self-employed. They don't have companies. They just work for other companies. You know, they all say, but how do you know when the next paycheck's coming from? How can you live with that uncertainty?
I remember being in it was like my 4th year or 3rd year at university. I remember just being permanently skint. I mean, constantly negative, overdrawn balance, like never having any money.
Yeah.
And getting back to the Leeds house with my girlfriend and being like, okay, what are we actually going to do for food here? You know, just more overdraft, I guess, you know, like, and fuel and stuff to get back, and train tickets, you know, just simple stuff like that. And just looking at the bank account, and to me, that the idea of that now is kind of a nightmare. You know, like, how did I even get past one day without melting down? You know, so you get better at it, and you get better at not spending superfluously, and also like preparing, you know, saving a bit on the side and stuff like that.
Someone's probably thinking, especially like your girlfriend at the time, or in my case, my mum, who occasionally was like, why are you doing that? You know, you're
just go and work down Tesco.
Yeah, you were doing well when you were working in the sports centre. You had lots of money. Yeah, but that's not what I wanted to do. You know, and
just go back to the sports centre. It was almost like there was no other option. It wasn't even in my scope of thinking, full stop, to do anything other than have a go. I think in my 20s, I was like absolutely sure, you know, this is definitely what I'm going to do. Like, you know, I was so cocksure. I was like, there's no chance in hell I'm not
quite
going to do
nice being
else.
that confident about something.
I know, yeah. I wish it was back. No.
You can afford to be unhealthy in your 20s. You can kind of get away with it. Like if you're spending so much time on this one project, and maybe you're struggling to pay the rent and you're not eating the right food and you're kind of falling apart, but you're willing to spend that time on that project, you can kind of get away with it because you're in your 20s, and you're always going to look back and go, oh God, what was I doing? But you were passionate. I think as you get older, and as you've mentioned, it's easier to just kind of go the path of least resistance.
Definitely.
This feels more natural. I want to meet people right now, and I'm not going to fight against that. I want to make this easy for myself, but also have it be productive and creative.
And I think we were the same in that regard. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we were at college, certainly, and because we both grew up on essentially a council estate, and we both went to state school, and I think the combination of those things, there's a subconscious learning process about life that you grow up to expect failure, you know, and not to expect too much, you know, from the world. Find your little place, and you know, just sit in and I think we were probably quite rare in the rebellion of that idea, and always wanting to push the envelope a bit and get, you know, try and squeeze out of that little slightly oppressive existence. So the idea of networking, when people would say that, oh, it's all about, you know, networking, and, you know, it used to make me go, God, like the idea of doing that on purpose, as a thing, you know, used to make my skin turn. But I've never been more interested in people, new people, you know, and it's not cynical. It's not like a deliberate, you know, I'm going out networking. Yeah. It's just more about, if you don't do that, you're never going to meet inspiring people. And I think that more and more actually is fundamental to good work for me.
Absolutely. Well, it's inspiring, and the more people like that you work with, the more you're like, oh my God, if I have that feeling with anyone else, I'm happy. Yeah. You know, because I can't have that feeling with myself. It's not like I look at my own work and I'm like, oh, God, this is great.
I'm so good.
Yeah, I'm so good. You don't. But when you see other people's work, you do sense that, like, if my work does this to other people, like, that would be amazing. Like,
you know, like when you watch a film, I mean, when you're young, that's certainly what happens, isn't it? You know, when you watch a film or a TV show or whatever, and you just think, wow, someone pulled all that together and turned it from parts into this thing. Yeah. The weird parts come together and make this amazing thing, and make your hairs go up on the back of your neck.
Yeah, like fucking Lord of the Rings.
Oh, Lord of the Rings is the one. I mean, for our generation, definitely. Like
Lord of the Rings is probably the best film ever made.
Yeah, on record, that is not disputed.
I went to the cinema to see Lord of the Rings, and I was like, what's the big deal? It's okay, it's good. Like, I'll watch the next two. I watched all of them at the cinema. I didn't quite get the why they were so good. I mean, I definitely enjoyed them at the time. It was only when I kind of got in my mid-20s where I rewatched them at home. I definitely remember thinking this is the best film ever made. And I stand by that.
It's funny. I went to the cinema with to see it with I think it was my family basically. I certainly remember my brother being there, and I think probably my mum and dad. My uncle also came. He was a big fan of the books, and he knew the books kind of inside out. And what I remember from the film most of all is walking out of the cinema, and there was a couple of guys behind us or in front of us or something. I was walking out with my uncle, and it was the first film, where the ending, they're just about to walk through the marshes or whatever. They're not there.
It's the first
yet.
film.
Yeah, it's one of three. And sort of, I think anyone who had any knowledge of Lord of the Rings knew that was the idea, right? But there was these guys behind us who said something along the lines of, well, it was a crap ending, wasn't it? Something like that. And my uncle, who's like fiercely passionate Tolkien fan, just turned around and went, "It's the one of three, you numpty," whatever it was. They took a risk, that studio, in commissioning all three at the same time.
That was one of the first one of threes.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's like, if you watch one film and it doesn't end definitively, you know that there's probably going to be a trilogy of those films, right? Or if you're James Cameron, you'd make 4 of them for some reason, like Avatar. I was thinking about like my first experience getting into the industry. I don't know if you have a memory of your first or whether it just happened naturally, but for me, there was like this definitive thing that happened where there was a teacher, right, at uni who worked at Pinewood. And she said in the lesson, anyone who wants to get running work at Pinewood Studios, right, can talk to me at the end of the lesson. And I went up to her and said, "Excuse me, you just said that we could potentially get some work at Pinewood." And she was like, yeah. Give me your contact details and I'll let you know. And she said, "You're probably not going to be able to do running work until you are like finished with your degree, right?" I get to the end of my 3rd year and I'm freaking out. I've got to find a way to pay the bills. So I'm calling all of my contacts. I am exhausting every one of my contacts over the last 3 years. None of them are answering the phone, right?
Yeah. It's do or die.
Yeah, and I also had a bit of something to prove to my family who were down. And so I also didn't want to turn up to them in tatters. Like, "Oh, sorry, I need money, Mum. And
I still do that.
Yeah, I still do that too. I was calling all these contacts, and eventually Mickey responds, right, saying, "Oh, hey, if you just come by to Pinewood Teddington Studios, we can chat and we can have an interview there, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Okay." And she gave me the date, she gave me the time. So anyway, that weekend I stayed at my grandma's, which was right next to Teddington Studios. My grandma was there, but also my brother came down from Finland. My mum was there. Their kids were there, and everyone was like, "Good luck, make sure you take a breath, don't get too nervous." And they were trying to give me this advice, and I was like, "Okay, this is great." Anyway, went to Pinewood, and obviously she forgot about it, and I turned up, and there was no mention of an interview. Right. And I was speaking to the receptionist, and she said to me, no, and she really didn't want me in there, right? That was the first time I realised how insignificant you are as a student to people who actually...
You went from the high of the high, being, selected.
Selected, yeah.
For Pinewood's
feeling special
running crew, to being completely forgotten.
When I have to lie, I'm just going to lie and say it went okay, and then because they were literally telling me not to be nervous to this thing that didn't even exist. So I actually just decided, and this whole thought process went on for about 40 minutes. Like I left the reception, I went into the car park, I sat on this bench, and I was just like, she said that Mickey was coming in the afternoon. So I sat on the bench.
Till the afternoon? Wow.
I remembered what car she had, right? And so when her car...
That's borderline stalker behaviour, isn't
when
it?
her car turned up, right? No, but fuck it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've said, so...
It's so true. You've got... This is what you've got to do.
In the car park, I was like, right, I'm going to walk in. And I tried to keep the conversation with the receptionist going as long as I could. And she was annoyed that I was back. And as I turned around to leave, I run straight into her. And I'm like, "Oh, Mickey, how are you doing? I thought we said that we were going to meet at 10 o'clock. I wasn't annoyed.
Not putting her on the spot, no.
I just said, and I could see she was like, "Oh my God. Oh yeah, okay. Julia, or whoever the receptionist, could you just tell Adam to speak to Luke, the head of post-production, and get him to give him a quick run around of the building and whatnot." He didn't know who I was.
Why am I showing this person?
She gave him no information, right, except for the fact that I'm here for a tour. And then, so while I was walking around, he was like, "Am I supposed to be impressing this person? Am I supposed to be telling this person that I've got work for him? Like what?" And so he was showing me the set of Alien, which they shot there. He was showing me Captain America that was being shot there at the time, the first film.
You're like a Willy Wonka ticket winner at that point, you know, just being shown.
Stolen the ticket.
Exactly,
broken into the factory.
Broken into Pinewood.
He was like, well, we've got plenty of shifts if you want to do. We've got tomorrow, we've got next week. Do you want me to put your name down for these? And I was like, yeah, I can do those. What are they? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Let me just check my... Obviously nothing going on.
You just open the calendar.
Exactly.
Blank.
I was like, I think I can probably do all of them. Put my name down for all of them. And then when I got home, they had all just gotten back home from their day out. And they were like, how did the interview go? And I was like, I got the job. I've been given the shift. And they were like, amazing, you did so well. And everyone was clapping. And I was like, yeah. Little did they know that I'd literally had to break into the... So to make that story so long, but my experience of breaking into the industry was literally breaking into the industry. So
yeah, but that's the winner mentality. It's funny you asking the question because I've had a bit of time to think about it in the ridiculously long story of yours, which was amazing.
I'm sorry.
Like in the third year of my university degree, they were running this guinea pig program where they said you can do a year in industry. So if you can find a company who is open to having you work for a year, you can kind of doss about there, you know, learn some of the ropes and not do any work here. You just have to write a kind of summary of what you did. And I didn't know anyone, you know, I mean, I was like 19 or whatever. I'd never worked in a studio. I'd had my own studio, but I didn't know anyone. So I just started emailing kind of people I thought might be interested or whatever, you know, and it was kind of, the spread was huge, you know. And
where do I start?
Exactly. And I must have sent loads of emails. It was production houses and composing houses at the time, which you don't really get anymore. But, you know, places where people write music and also like studios, I guess. And then I was also like, for fun, I was kind of with this bunch of online guys, because I was a bit of a nerd, an internet nerd. We were doing this, recreating this game, Outcast, from, it was like 1999. And I loved the music in this game. And I think, even now, I think it's some of the best, most groundbreaking orchestral music in a game. And it was really quite early, like, in the history of video game soundtracks, to be using a full orchestra. And what I thought to do was, the composer for the original game is a guy called Lenny Moore. I think he was aware of the project, and I think he was proud of the fact that some teenage nerds were trying to sort of, you know, homage it, and I was doing a particularly bad job of homaging his orchestral score. And so I emailed him. I just said, I've been offered this industry placement at uni. And I didn't ask him outright. I didn't say, you know, could I work with you? I think he lived in America anyway. He's American. So that wouldn't have worked. But amazingly, Lenny Moore got back to me immediately, virtually, and said, I obviously can't offer you anything. Sorry about that. But there's this guy in the UK who probably could. And so give him a go. And he said, this guy in the UK is called Richard Jakes. And so he sent his email address or whatever. And I emailed Richard Jakes and said, hey, Lenny Moore just told me to email you. You never expect to get an answer, like, ever. I still didn't, because Brits are cynical and I'm cynical. So if I get an email like that, I'm looking at it and I'm going, you know, how good's this guy? You know, he's young. But amazingly, Richard was one of these guys. He happened to be interested immediately. And he said, yeah, that sounds like it might work. I never imagined anyone saying yes. What I imagined, the best I'd get would be like a runner at a studio, like a music studio, and I'd sit in the corner and make tea and coffee and watch, and I'd be happy with that.
It's funny though. It's about the time. It's about the time of day that email was received. It's about when it was sent, how it was worded. Yeah. There's so many factors into it. It's not just an email sent to 1,000 people. It's 1,000 different ways to write an email.
Something made him say, "Yeah, I'll give this guy a chance." And then so I thought, wow, it's actually possible, you know. But back then, of course, you're still thinking, I'm going to be the next Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just going to go straight over him into, you know, absolute rock star.
If anything, Hans Zimmer wasn't even that good.
No, exactly. In fact, I remember saying that a few times. You know, that's the arrogance of youth. Yeah. But so
that's the arrogance I use.
So I think he impressed upon me, you know, that generosity of spirit with regards to people.
In some ways, these people that we're talking about, not necessarily in my case, but certainly in yours, inadvertently they become mentors you know.
Yeah, he was without. I mean, he was not just a mentor accidentally. He was literally supposed to be a kind of mentor as well through that year in
But it's
industry.
like a mentor that you're
A mentor in a way that I
really
didn't
proud of.
expect. This is the thing.
Yeah.
So it was like
That's how mentors are supposed to be.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to hire a mentor. It's supposed to be like,
you think you're going there to learn about music.
yeah,
you know,
get
but-
some industry experience.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it would be more about learning chords, you know, and like how to use certain harmonies and how to certain instruments and much more like practical things. But what I found interesting about my apprenticeship with Richard was there was very little of that direct kind of tutorship, because the assumption is that you're going to figure that out.
What did he teach you?
So it's all the other stuff, you know. So he taught me how to teach myself.
Yeah.
For a start, you know. I don't know if he realizes that, but I think he did absolutely do that. I did sort of school preparation and stuff with him, which is basically where you they've written something musically that is like just a sound on the computer, like maybe MIDI notes or whatever. And your job is to turn it into something that a player can read and reproduce.
Yeah.
So I would do, on a day-to-day level, I'd do stuff like that. And I think like the creative industry is, what's interesting about the creative industry is it's an essential part of it. That kind of drive and that passion, you have to fight through thick mud. It's a really competitive industry. I mean, super competitive. So you have to be up for the fight. Mm-hmm. You know, giving up is not what you do. Mm-hmm. It's not an option. If you're a giver-upper, you're not in the industry. That's the definition. I've come to accept that that's how it is.
Like literally, I can name a couple of people, a handful of people who I knew from back then who are now still working in the industry. And pretty much they're the ones.
Everyone else has gone on to earn proper money and have a proper job.
Yeah. Everyone else is happy.
Yeah.
and all the people who are left are the people I'm interviewing. Do you still feel that university is worth doing if you're someone who wants to get into a creative industry, whether it be music?
Yeah, I suppose I don't really know. I mean, specifically music, I don't think you need a university degree, probably. As long as you're willing to work and learn, you can teach with YouTube and everything, you can learn everything you need to know, pretty much. But university does teach you about people and about socializing and like the different kinds of people that exist in the world. And that I think is really valuable. So that little bit of training with people was probably worth the 50 grand or whatever whatever I spent on uni. That little piece of certificate on my wall.
You wouldn't go and do a master's?
Maybe. If you'd asked me that in fact, you probably did ask me that 5 years ago, because you have done one.
Well, I didn't want to. I never wanted to do a master's ever, and then I had somewhere along the line, 2015, really, 15, 16. It's about, what's that, like 5 years after graduating. I was like, I wonder if I could find something where I can really get specific with the subject.
That's the thing about like university masters, especially, I think, is kind of an excuse as much as anything else to put the time aside and go deep in something. And I've never considered it more than I would now, you know, but because I got luxury of time and becoming a bit more focused is quite attractive as an idea. But I think, funnily enough, for me, it wouldn't be music. It'd probably be like history or film or something.
Well, that's what I love about masters, is that you can get really specific with the subject, and the subject doesn't have to be related to the original degree that you did, the BSc or BA degree.
It's sort of a leisure degree.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to get in the music industry now?
I was always looking at the big picture way too much. You don't need to do that. There's no point. All it does is make you worry about, you know, what's the point, you know?
Yeah.
So don't bother with that. Just whatever you're doing, do it really well, and just knuckle down, focus. It's easy to say that now, but I don't know if I'd accept that advice if I was younger, because.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't
exactly.
it? You wouldn't accept
it's kind of
it's a mindset thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Your mental model changes.
Yeah, it's not really advice in that sense, because I know it wouldn't be accepted. Have a bit of faith that you will get there, you know, and just like keep going and just I think ultimately wanting to do a good job and wanting to be good is enough.
It is 100%. If you're good enough, you will get noticed. But I think a lot of people think that you need to get noticed by 1 million people in order to be successful, whereas actually just getting noticed by a handful of people who think you're brilliant at what you do.
That's a really good point.
It's still success.
Yeah.
And I think people are getting so caught up in this insta-famous society that we live, where it's like, oh my God, this person's got 1 million followers, and that, if I've only got 24,000.
I think I'm always surprised how hollow those numbers are. The industry, what I've learned is the industry is big. It's okay to be this little cog in a big machine, as long as it's as long as you're getting to something that's you can be proud of at the end of it. You might be one part of a team of 70 or something. It doesn't matter. No, and also as long as you can earn a living and you can produce something that's good quality, that's enough. I think sometimes people worry about the appearing to be busy more than actually being busy.
Yeah, people's fake lives over their real lives.
Yeah, it must basically by extension you've ended up with this fake thing that you're presenting,
and you spend more time on the fake thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and that to me is I like to believe that is never gonna work. That's never gonna fly, because the John Williams of the world, or the Howard Shore, or whatever it might be, the Hans Zimmer, they weren't doing that. They weren't fustering around worrying about their image.
Yeah, I do sometimes ask myself the question, why do I do what I do? And what happiness do I get out of
I
it?
ask that every morning of myself.
I made and every morning I'm upset with the answer. I made a short film this year on Super 8, just of basically.
Super 8 is like a homemade
Super 8
film,
camera,
isn't it?
Super 8 film camera. We shot our film on Super 16 and some on 35mm. This one, Super 8, is even
smaller,
more old-fashioned. But I shot it on Super 8, and it was just a journey of Tam's pregnancy, my partner's pregnancy, and then also having the baby and what it's been like in the first year of having the kid. And these are all in snippets of 3 months, 4 months, 5 months with a voiceover. I had such a response from that because it's personal filmmaking. It's not writing a character you've never experienced those things that character has done. It's not writing about something you don't know. It's writing about something that's deeply personal and that people can respond to. Personal filmmaking is where I want to go.
Yes. Authenticity is key. So it's interesting what you said about not designing a character or forcing a perspective. The guys who last in the industry, in my experience, are the ones who are not trying to be stars. And actually, that age is wonderful for this, because as you get older, you get more confident.
You strip back on all the crap.
You do. And all of that kind of, I want to be the next Hans Zimmer thing, it all goes away. You don't worry about that anymore. You don't need to be the next Hans Zimmer. You're not going to be anyway. Yeah, that's the best thing about getting older I've experienced so far. Yeah, I've managed to find a little niche where I don't need to be popular, but there's pride and joy and satisfaction.
We're lucky to be able to do
exactly.
what we can do.
And now I'm sure of that more than ever.
These podcasts always go by in like a flash. I don't understand how we've gone through almost 3 hours of us just chatting about shit. But
we could stay here all night.
We could. We literally could talk about anything. We could talk about cooking for an hour.
Shall we?
Which will be for the next episode.
Is that a different podcast?
Yeah. Thanks for coming all the way down to do this, man. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's something I've wanted to do for so long, so I really know I do appreciate it. And sorry it couldn't be longer, but I hope you've enjoyed coming to the studio, and I'll have you on again at some point.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Yeah, look forward to the next one. And let's get a Nando's.
Absolutely.